Hello, everyone. This is Jaffrey Sachs. Less than an hour ago, something surfaced that was never meant to be seen outside a sealed room, and the implications are far more serious than anyone was prepared for. Overnight, while most of the country was asleep, U.S. airstrikes hit Venezuelan military targets, and within minutes, a statement attributed to the President of the United States claimed that Nicolás Maduro had been captured and flown out of the country. That alone would be enough to shake global markets and rattle diplomatic channels. But what I'm about to walk you through goes much deeper than a single military operation. It involves internal briefings, sealed correspondence, and sworn testimony that paints a picture not of a sudden decision, but of a carefully constructed path toward confrontation. What follows changes everything because it raises questions about authority, timing, and intent that reach far beyond Venezuela and directly into the core of American power. Before we go further, subscribe right now because what you're about to hear is being quietly ignored everywhere else. And once this information spreads, it cannot be taken back. Now let's slow this down and lay out what actually sits in the record. The first set of materials comes from what are described as internal operational briefings, dated weeks before the first explosion was reported in Caracas. These are not press releases. They are marked restricted circulation, with distribution lists that include senior defense officials and political advisors. The pages are numbered, but several numbers are missing. Read that again. The sequence jumps. Page 4 goes directly to page 7, and on the bottom of each page is a timestamp logged to the minute. The earliest one reads 03:14 a.m. with a note in the margin. Window acceptable if regional conditions stabilize. Let me read this word for word. Objective parameters remain flexible pending executive authorization. That sentence appears 3 times across 2 separate documents dated 9 days apart, not once, not twice, repeatedly. And each time, the same initials appear next to it, handwritten, as if someone wanted to make sure it wouldn't be overlooked. Attached to those briefings is an email chain, subject line, contingency alignment. The sender's address is partially redacted, but the domain is federal. The body of the email references Delta involvement, followed by a line that simply says public narrative to follow success. No qualifiers, no hypotheticals. Success is treated as a given, but it gets worse. A second document, released as evidence in a closed-door oversight review, includes contemporaneous notes taken during a secure call. These notes are not polished. They're shorthand, fragments, arrows connecting phrases. One line reads, capture outcome preferable to neutralization. Another reads, election calendar sensitivity. That phrase appears twice, circled. Think about that. The official explanation offered to the public focused on drug trafficking networks and regional security, but nowhere in these early documents is there a detailed discussion of narcotics interdiction. Instead, the focus is political stability, perception management, and international reaction timing. One paragraph, partially blacked out, ends with the words domestic resilience test. Here's the part no one expected. There is a memo dated exactly 72 hours before the strikes, marked for briefing use only. It includes a projected media timeline. Hour 0, confirmation of strikes. Hour 2, controlled leak of capture claim. Hour 6, allied statements. Hour 12, congressional reaction anticipated. And next to that, in parentheses, manageable. Now let's move to phase 2 of the material because this is where contradictions start stacking up. A larger document dump includes internal correspondence between legal advisors and senior officials. These emails were exchanged under the assumption of privilege. One message asks directly, do we require explicit authorization? The response sent 4 minutes later reads, Existing authorities interpreted broadly should suffice. Under oath, during a later deposition, one official was asked whether Congress had been consulted in advance. The answer was carefully worded. There was awareness of ongoing regional posture. Awareness, not approval, not authorization. Awareness. Read that again. Another email references optics if capture disputed. That line alone suggests uncertainty about whether the claimed outcome could be independently verified. And sure enough, within hours of the announcement, conflicting statements began to emerge. Venezuelan officials demanded proof of life. Defense spokespeople spoke of orders issued in Maduro's name. Two narratives running parallel, neither fully substantiated in public. Inside the United States, the reaction was immediate but fragmented. Internal memos from congressional offices show staff scrambling to understand what had happened. One memo includes a blunt assessment. If this stands, precedent expands. Another warns, if this unravels, exposure is severe. And then there's the timeline, because timelines don't lie, even when statements do. The military buildup in the Caribbean didn't begin suddenly. Shipping logs, satellite imagery references, and deployment schedules all show a steady escalation over months. Exercises labeled as routine, movements described as precautionary. Yet in private correspondence, the language is far more deliberate. Positioning complete. Assets in place. Await signal. Let me read this word for word from a dated entry. Weather delay acceptable, political window more important. That entry is signed off by two different departments, not once, not twice, coordinated. But here's where the stakes rise. A courtroom transcript from a related but separate case includes testimony about executive decision-making processes. The witness, under oath, is asked whether military options were discussed alongside domestic political considerations. There is a pause noted in the transcript, then the answer. Scenarios were evaluated holistically. Holistically. Short sentences matter here because each one strips away plausible deniability. This isn't about one document, it's about a system where foreign action, domestic politics, media management, and legal interpretation converge into a single decision-making stream. If this were anywhere else, analysts would call it centralized power consolidation. But because it's wrapped in national security language, it's treated as exceptional. You have to ask, why now? Why this moment? Why this scale? The analysis becomes unavoidable when you line everything up. Election pressures mounting, legal challenges intensifying, public trust eroding, and then a dramatic assertion of executive strength on the global stage. The timing doesn't exist in isolation. It intersects with voter sentiment, with congressional gridlock, with a judiciary under strain. Morally, the question is whether ends justify means when transparency is sacrificed. Politically, the question is who benefits if the narrative holds and who pays if it collapses. Legally, the question is how far authority can stretch before it snaps. And internationally, the consequences ripple outward. Allies reassess, adversaries recalibrate, markets flinch, norms bend. The documents don't scream conspiracy, they whisper coordination, and sometimes whispers are more dangerous because they're harder to disprove. I'm not making accusations, I'm reading what's in the file, official records released as evidence, contemporaneous notes, statements under oath that don't quite align. If nothing changes, this becomes the template. If no one demands clarity, ambiguity becomes policy. And when ambiguity governs the use of force, the line between defense and dominance blurs beyond recognition. We are left at a moment of suspended certainty, claims made, proof contested, authority asserted, accountability deferred. The silence after that question was not accidental, it was engineered. And this is where the file moves from implication to consequence. because buried beneath the documents I just described is a second layer that only became visible once timelines were reconstructed side by side, not summaries, originals released as evidence in fragments. When aligned, they reveal a sequence that does not match the public explanation in any meaningful way. The first contradiction appears in a classified briefing summary stamped 2 days after the strikes. It states flatly that confirmation of capture was pending verification. Pending. That word alone undermines the certainty of the original announcement. Yet the same summary references initial success messaging already deployed. Messaging deployed before verification. Read that again. Let me read this word for word. Narrative momentum must be maintained to avoid perception loss. That sentence is underlined in blue ink, not once, not twice, repeatedly across 3 separate pages. And then there is the testimony. An insider described only as a senior operational liaison provided a sworn statement months later in a closed proceeding. Under oath, this person confirmed that the operation success criteria had been internally revised hours before execution. The original objective included multiple contingencies. The revised objective narrowed to a single outcome, visible dominance. Those are the words used, visible dominance. Here's the part no one expected. The liaison states that capture was treated as a political accelerant, not a tactical necessity. Think about that. An accelerant, something designed to speed a reaction already underway. Now we move to the internal memos that followed. These were circulated after international reactions began to fracture. Some allies expressed concern, others stayed silent. And inside the U.S. government, the tone shifted from confidence to containment. One memo includes a line that reads, "If proof cannot be produced, redirect focus." Redirect focus to what? The memo doesn't say, but the timing coincides with a sudden surge of domestic headlines unrelated to Venezuela, court filings, border clashes, congressional walkouts, noise. This is where media manipulation enters the picture, not as theory, but as documented strategy. And internal correspondence references coverage saturation thresholds. Another discusses audience fatigue curves. These are not military terms. They are media analytics terms, and they appear in the same thread as operational updates. But it gets worse. A later document marked post-action review includes a section titled Lessons for Future Use. Lesson 1, speed outpaces scrutiny. Lesson 2, authority expands in crisis conditions. Lesson 3, delayed oversight loses force. Short sentences, cold conclusions. At this point, the question of legality can no longer be avoided. A draft legal opinion, never finalized but circulated internally, argues that existing authorizations could be interpreted to cover the action. Interpreted, not explicit, not direct, interpreted. And in the margin, someone has written risk acceptable. Acceptable to whom? A separate set of contemporaneous notes from a congressional staff briefing shows confusion bordering on disbelief. One note reads, "We were informed, not consulted." Another says, "This sets precedent we may not survive." Those notes were never meant for public eyes. They were written in the moment as events outpace process. And then there's the election context. You can't ignore it because the documents don't. A calendar attachment appears in 2 different folders. One is a political operations calendar. The other is a national security planning calendar. The same week is highlighted on both. That overlap is not explained anywhere. It's simply there. When asked under oath whether election considerations influence timing, one official responded, "No decisions were made for electoral advantage." That answer is carefully phrased. It doesn't say elections were irrelevant. It says advantage was not the explicit goal. There's a difference. Now let's talk about Venezuela, because the story doesn't end in Washington. Inside the files are translated intercept summaries. These describe confusion within Venezuelan command structures, orders issued, counter orders delayed, a vacuum. One summary notes uncertainty regarding chain of command legitimacy. That uncertainty is the real outcome of the operation, not stability, not resolution, uncertainty. International law experts and internal consultations warn that prolonged ambiguity could escalate tensions beyond control. Those warnings are acknowledged in emails, then dismissed with phrases like manageable fallout and short attention cycle. Short attention cycle, that phrase appears again. The analysis becomes unavoidable. This was not a rogue act. It was not an impulsive decision. It was a convergence of incentives, political pressure, legal elasticity, media leverage, and a belief that speed could outrun accountability. You have to ask why systems allow this, why processes designed to restrain power instead bend around it. The answer isn't one person, it's structural. It's a culture that treats crisis as opportunity and opacity as protection. Morally, the cost is trust. When announcements precede verification, truth becomes optional. Politically, the cost is precedent. Each stretch of authority becomes the baseline for the next. Legally, the cost is erosion. Interpretations pile up until the original text no longer matters. And socially, the cost is cynicism. Voters sense when narratives are shaped rather than revealed. They may not know the documents, but they feel the dissonance. The final document in the file is the quietest, a one-page note, unsigned, dated weeks after the strikes. It reads, outcome inconclusive, narrative sustained. That's it. No flourish, no justification, just an admission. If nothing changes, this becomes normal. If no one demands proof before proclamation, authority will always choose speed over truth. And when that happens, the line between governance and performance disappears. This matters now because the machinery is still running. The same actors, the same incentives, the same playbook. Only the context will change. The story doesn't end with Venezuela. It ends with a question about who decides, who verifies, and who benefits when power moves faster than accountability. And until that question is answered, the file remains open. The documents don't scream conspiracy, they whisper coordination. And sometimes whispers are more dangerous because they're harder to disprove. I'm not making accusations, I'm reading what's in the file. Official records released as evidence, contemporaneous notes, statements under oath that don't quite align. If nothing changes, this becomes the template. If no one demands clarity, ambiguity becomes policy. And when ambiguity governs the use of force, the line between defense and dominance blurs beyond recognition. We are left at a moment of suspended certainty, claims made, proof contested, authority asserted, accountability deferred.